Dragon Riders, Kaze no Kaeru, by Night Dragon Zero. Chris's perspective. As hard as I tried, I couldn't get any sleep, so instead, I decided to press Scantrix for more information. Scantrix told me about how he too had been thrown into a cell and forced to fight battle after battle. He'd been trying to communicate the whole time, but he was never understood by anyone. He'd lived through 4 years of that suffering, until one day he was approached by a Scyther in a neighboring cage. That Scyther was Alucard, who told him about a forming secret Pokemon organization. He'd found it hard to believe, but Alucard had promised that he would be busted out the next day while being transported on a truck. All happened as Alucard had said, and he joined up with Stormwind, Firefly, and a bunch of other recruits. They'd needed a Pokemon with the knowledge of human technology to help build up their organization, and he'd be too happy to help. As I pushed him for more things, he began to talk more about Alucard, the legendary dragons, and the Chimera projects of Team Rocket and Silph. The last of the three especially made me feel sick about the human race. Those made me want, even more, to go out and kill a bunch of rockets. But the dragon part was interesting. At a previous encounter with our nemesis, Alucard had mentioned the Knights of Kaze. I now found that it referred to the 8 dragons that had once been on Kaiser's side. Formerly being one of them, Alucard had sensed their awakening. I let Scantrix rest his voice as I told him my story. The only thing I didn't know was how I'd suddenly become a Pokemon, and so the hour of judgment drew nearer. "It should be about now," Scantrix said. Right on cue, an explosion rocked the area. Screams were heard and alarms blared. "What?" I gasped. The cell's doors were promptly blown open. In it stood a Scizor clad in a silver Kevlar vest and wearing a helmet with a red visor. One that had been our greatest enemy in the past was turning out to be my rescuer. "Well, Chris, what do you think of our jailbreak?" he grinned. "Cut the crap," I snarled at him. "You know I still don't trust you, Alucard." "But of course, I expected that of you," Alucard replied. "However, we should discuss this in a more secured location. Come on." I followed Alucard and Scantrix out into the corridor to witness an astonishing sight. All around, various Pokemon were attacking the rockets, from the ferocious Houndoom to the tiny Rattata and a gigantic Steelix. It was chaos in a way I could have never imagined. "Not bad for a first-time raid of this scale," Alucard laughed. "Anyway, Chris, this happens to be a rocket base up at the mountains around Blackthorn City." "The Blackthorn City base?" I gasped. I should have guessed it earlier from the design of the cells. "I know this place! I've worked here before in the past." "How convenient," Alucard remarked. "I assume you know the layout fairly well." "Hell yes! It's hard to forget considering the time I spent here," I nodded, both as a human and as a Scyther. "Unfortunately, the Rocket boss left weeks ago. Even so, how would you like to give Team Rocket a little payback?" "What do you mean?" "See this?" An Alakazam appeared next to him and dropped a large brown bag. It was filled with C4s. "I don't believe this," I gasped, staring at the collection of plastic explosives. "You should believe it, my dear. There's enough firepower in here to blow this place to Kingdom Come," Alucard said proudly. "We did hack into their files, but not enough of them. We couldn't risk being traced after all. So if you could get us into the generator room..." I didn't even need for him to finish the sentence. I knew exactly what he wanted me to do. It was something I wanted too. "Let's send these motherfuckers to hell," I growled. Alucard's helmet left his lower jaw exposed, allowing me to see the wide grin that crept over his face. Jade's perspective. I roared, pulling on the rope, in turn throwing the human that held it off the cliff. Battling atop this high mountain was to my advantage. His comrades cried out at yet another one of their losses. "You will rue the day you dared mess with me." 3 humans remained, and now that my mouth was free, I unleashed my flames upon them. 2 of them went down, burning to the bone. The last man turned to flee, but I wasn't done yet. "None shall escape my wrath." I flew around him and caught him in my jaws. He was screaming all the way until I crunched down. I then sliced him horizontally with my claws, taking great pride in seeing his blood flow. All around lay the charred, bleeding, or headless bodies of my enemies, both human and Pokemon. These fools had tried to attack me, the most powerful of the Charizard, and had paid for the price of their foolishness. Like all warriors, I was not immune to damage, having taken multiple cuts and bruises, but I had emerged triumphant. Nothing would deter me from reaching my destination. However, I now had a huge feast ready for my personal enjoyment. and so to the victor go the spoils of war. Chris's perspective. This way! I yelled, leading the group. I was constantly amazed at how the Pokemon grouped up and took out the supposedly superior humans. There were casualties, of course, but that was quite unavoidable with all the guns blazing. With Algard and Scantrix behind me, and the Alakazam doing short-distance teleports, we flew through the maze of winding corridors. It was rather exhilarating to be using my wings for the first time, but I didn't have time to enjoy that either. I was trying to recall what I knew of the base's layout. It's amazing what you can remember when you really need to. We soon found ourselves at a huge electronic door. Damn, looks like it's locked by a passcode, Scantrix muttered, glaring at the numerical key panel. Can you break it? Algard asked the Alakazam. Don't bother, I told them. I fired a hyper beam into the left wall, blowing a hole in it. Not so much because of the beam, but rather the machinery and circuitry exploding on the other side of the wall. The door gave an electric crackle and slid open. These idiots built the control panel on the other side of the wall, I laughed. Man, I like you already, girl, Scantrix gasped. Hurry up, we got a job to do, Algard reminded us. We entered the room, true to its name, that was filled from wall to wall with all sorts of machinery and power generators. Start setting the charges, Algard ordered like a general. Move, move, move! Both him and the Alakazam went about this immediately. Scantrix had to use his mouth to pick up the C4s and stick them onto various machines. I mimicked his actions with my own jaws, seeing my bladed claws were unable to pick up anything. When there was just one C4 left in the bag, Scantrix and I both reached for it. We ended up bumping heads and gave each other odd stares. Algard then stepped between us and grabbed the last explosive. You two had better not loiter around. This place will be going up in 5, he said. Scantrix, you take Chris out of here. I'll be setting the last charge, then passing out the evac alarm. He nodded towards Alakazam, who teleported away to carry out his orders. Come on, Scantrix told me. I'll show you the shortest way. I followed the Skarmory back into the hallways. I forced myself to ignore the stench of blood all around, the moans of the wounded and dying, the dead bodies of all types that lay scattered about. It had been a bloodbath, but this victory had certainly gone to the Pokemon. They'd had the advantage in the sense that the rockets weren't entirely prepared for an all-out attack from Pokemon without trainers. Algard had claimed that their communication system had been knocked out, thus far throwing them into a panic fray. I was dashing as fast as I could when I spotted something that made me stop. Wait! I yelled. What is it? I flew down and landed beside one of the bodies. It was that of a teenage girl with long, shoulder-length black hair, lying face down on the floor. Unlike the others, she didn't have her uniform on. I put my snout to her neck, found that she was still breathing, and turned her over. Nala! I gasped. I remembered this was the girl that had spoken to me, way back on the ship. You know my... This girl? Scantrix asked. His voice had broken slightly when he'd asked me that, but I didn't have time to ask why. She's not like the rest of these bastards. Unlike them, she isn't here by choice, I said softly. I have to save her. Help me. Yes, of course. Scantrix had something on his mind, but decided not to say anything else as he helped place the girl over my shoulder. It was much harder flying with a passenger, but I forced my aching muscles to work. Scantrix blew open an elevator door, and we flew into the shaft. The elevator was above and rapidly falling towards us. This is gonna be a close one, Scantrix warned. He suddenly swerved and blew open the door of the highest level, flying through it. Like a fighter plane in formation, I followed, barely avoiding being crushed by the falling elevator. After that, it was just a straight flight out, via shattering some windows and down into the forest below. As Scantrix and I finally landed, exhausted, we looked up just in time to see the rocket base erupt into a huge ball of flames. For a while, neither of us spoke. We just sat there and smiled at each other. It was the satisfaction of having survived this breathtaking encounter. But then Nala began to stir. It must have been quite a shock for her, waking up to stare into the faces of two very fierce-looking Pokemon. Gasping, she crawled back up against a tree. Relax, it's okay. I tried to comfort her. I almost hit myself when I realized she wouldn't be able to understand me. She says it's all right now. I glanced toward Scantrix in surprise as he spoke human speech. You're safe now, Nala, and free of Team Rocket. The confused girl looked up towards the burning base, higher up the mountain. I'm really free. At last. But who are you? How do you talk? You may think of us as your guardian angels, Scantrix said, but you must leave now before anyone else comes. Go out and live the life that's been taken from you. Nala nodded, scrambling to her feet. She then looked towards me. "Are you the Scyther I let her reach over my head and touch the scars along my back, the one she herself had inflicted. She then threw her arms around me and gave me a hug. "Thank you," she said, tears coming to her eyes. There was no need for words as I returned her embrace. She then went over to Scantrix and gave him a hug too. The Skarmory looked a little shocked, but he folded his wings around her as best he could. "Better go, Nala," he whispered. Nala gave a firm nod, wiped the tears from her eyes, then ran off into the forest. Blackthorn City wasn't very far away, and I felt she'd be able to reach it. Scantrix turned away from me. He was crying, and I really mean shaking with tears pouring down. As much as I wanted to know why, I couldn't bring myself to say anything. "I'll show you the base," Scantrix said. "It's not far away."